So my question is, what would be the next step if this regime consolidates power, the Trump-Pence regime?
Well, we're seeing. I mean, I can't. I'm not a fortune teller. I can't predict everything they do, but I think we get a good sense from what they're already doing. Clearly now you've got the Supreme Court. Where they already put another fascist on the Supreme Court to begin with, a Gorsuch guy. Now they've nominated another one, so that they'll have like and these Supreme Court nominations last people's lifetimes. So you're going to change that. So everything from a woman's right to to have an abortion, to things like gay marriage, to the giving more power to the police. I mean, you've seen what the line. Trump goes to Long Island, right? Gives a talk to the police and says, "Don't people complain that you're being brutal? Don't be so nice. When you put, I don't know if you saw this, but when you put somebody in a police car, basically smash their head against it. Don't put your hand over their head and put him in." I mean, what? So this is all these are the kind of things that are a necessary part of the way they're trying to transform the country. And basically, what's happened is, like I made the point, that if you try to get rid of all this stuff, which we can sort of concentrate in the term white supremacy, for example, or male supremacy, if you try to get rid of those things within this system, you're going to tear the entire fabric of the country apart. And one of the ways in which you can see that is that even the very limited and partial concessions that have been made are a big part of what has given rise to this whole fascist phenomenon of trying to basically destroy and reverse everything that's positive, even though limited, that has been achieved and been won through struggles since the end of the World War II, basically, over the last 70 or 80 years. They're trying to get rid of all that. The Make America Great Again means make America white again. It means, the way these people look at it, is that everything was fine up, and America was great. It was on top of the world up until, well, there are a number of things they say. Up until black people got uppity and said that they didn't want to live in these conditions anymore. Up until women said they didn't want. Do you know? This is an important thing. I mean, obviously, that it was only in the 1980s that the last state in this country, I believe it was North Carolina, actually made it so that raping your wife was not legal. In other words, up until the 1980s, there were still states in this country where a man could legally rape his wife. And this goes back through the whole history of the country. So think about that for a minute. That just sort of captures something in a very, dramatic way. But, the whole thing, women, could not have bank accounts separately from their husbands. All this kind of stuff was what was brought under, fire and struggled against coming off and out of World War II and through the 60s in particular. And, and the whole gay phenomenon, I mean, think about that. All these people who, they look around and, what the hell's happening? The whole country is going to hell, And we have to get back to the way it was when it was great. In other words, get rid of all these things that have changed in a positive way, even though they're limited and they, like I said, they can't really deal with the whole problem. And, they're angry about, the Vietnam War. The line that they've been sold, which they used to peddle back in the day, but it's gotten more out there now that we could have won the war, except we were betrayed by the politicians in Washington. See, we really were going to win the war in Vietnam, but the politicians in Washington wouldn't let us. I remember that William Westmoreland, who was one of the big commanders of the U.S. forces in Vietnam at the height of the Vietnam War, came back after they'd lost the war, basically, and made this speech and said, "We were winning the war in Vietnam, but we lost it in Berkeley." Now, having grown up in Berkeley, I was really excited by that. But, that's a great thing, but it wasn't true. I mean, people in Berkeley, sort of using that as a metaphor for all the protests around the country, did play an important, role in opposing that war and contributed to the fact that the U.S. couldn't have won it, which it should not have. But it was, it was the Vietnamese fighting in Vietnam and the whole international situation that was more, the reason that they couldn't win that war. I don't have time to go into all that now. But the point I'm making is that, you see, for a long time, all these veterans of the Vietnam War and, in general, veterans were sort of, they were sort of like felt on the defensive, and they weren't coming around because there was this whole movement of veterans, very good movement, Vietnam veterans against the war, They had this whole thing where they had a demonstration of thousands in Washington, D.C., where they took their medals and threw them away on the steps, and they said, next time we fight, it'll be to take these steps, and so on like this. So now all these veterans who were not coming from a good place, going all the way back to Vietnam, are coming out of the woodwork, and they got their veteran of Vietnam hats. I wanted to get a hat that said, veteran really big, of opposing imperialist wars. But anyway, all this kind of stuff, and then there's the whole thing where, there was the atheists of America who went to the Supreme Court and won a decision in the early 60s that the schools could not promote religion. So now a lot of these people say, well, that's when it, especially the Christian fundamentalists, that's when it all went to hell, is once they took God out of the schools. And now these people, that's another thing you should understand, want to gut public education. Because they don't want public education, because they think public education indoctrinates people in secular humanism. So they don't want that secular humanism. So they want, actually, they regard public schools as an enemy institution that should be destroyed, and instead should be replaced by, right now they're doing it with a lot of the, home schooling. But their ultimate goal is basically to get religious schools. So, all this is, if you look at all, all these different elements, this is all what Trump, who originally was not really with all this stuff. He's always been a racist and a misogynist, male chauvinist pig, but he wasn't with all this fascist stuff. But at a certain point, his racism and his male chauvinism pushed him in the direction of these fascist forces. And they sort of had an unholy alliance, where they're all of them are saying, well, all this stuff about him and running around with prostitutes and porn stars or whatever, and Playboy bunnies. That was a different Trump, now he's become, he's gotten religion, And I actually saw when you remember that Access Hollywood tape came out, grab him by the pussy and all. Well, I actually saw one of these women that was always on CNN, they seem to have an army, if you'll pardon me for saying this, of blonde zombies. And she was one of those on there, and she had her cross on and everything. And when this came out, the Access tape, she says, well, I believe that Trump can be saved. We're all washed in the blood of Jesus. We're all sinners. In other words, basically, never mind that, because he's doing all these fascist things that we want done, including promoting Christian fundamentalism, so we're going to ignore all this stuff. My point being, and to answer your question, I think you can see by all this is a very, concerted program. All this is the stuff that they're going after. And it has to do with knocking down even other ruling class forces and institutions that don't want to go to that in that particular direction. Like the media is the enemy of the people, and so on and so forth. There's a so-called deep state, the intelligence institutions, including even the CIA and FBI, which are monstrously criminal, but they're not fully under the control of these forces. So they want to basically remake everything to implement this whole program. And then internationally, it's like any kind of agreement that doesn't, that's been made is not good enough, because we have to become even more gangster-like And whether it's economic agreements or military agreements, we have to become even more gangster-like in pushing our interests. So if you look at all this, people constantly, especially, if you watch MSNBC or CNN or listen to the Democrats, they always want to talk about as if Trump doesn't know what he's doing, or he's about ready to be brought down next Tuesday by Mueller's investigation or whatever. But they act like he's sort of like a joke almost, or like, okay, he's bad, but he's really incompetent. He's not going to be, and he's rolling along with the whole program. Look at all the stuff they're implementing. I mean, this thing that they're doing against immigrants, which is another big thing. See, these people are freaked out about the fact that if the current trends continue, the United States will no longer be a white majority country in population within another decade or so, or maybe two. They're freaked out about that. This country has to have the identity as white, Christian, male-dominated, etc. So, this is the big push behind the anti-immigrant thing. And, we have to also struggle with people about that. You'll even hear people really oppressed, you'll even hear black people say, oh, these immigrants are taking our jobs. What's taken your job, quote unquote, is capitalism, not these immigrants, first of all. Second of all, you do not have a job. There is no job that has your name on it. And like this was bequeathed to me by my grandfather. This shit job for $8.25 an hour was my inheritance. No, you work or don't work depending on whether the capitalists can make out on exploiting you. And look, after World War I, a lot of black people came up from the South, and the capitalists did the same thing. They said, we can hire these desperately poor black people who've left everything behind in the South, and say white workers are on strike in St. Louis or something, we'll bring in all these black people to work there and then set up this whole thing where the white people will riot against them. And then, look, I'll just say it like this. Here's these white people saying, these black people are taking our jobs. Here's an appeal to black people. You do not want to sound like white people, okay? I mean, really think about it. Yes, look, people, you know what I mean. Look, people are desperate to get jobs and everything. Yes, that's true. But you should be joining with the other people who are being viciously exploited and impoverished the same way you are, instead of being played for suckers by being turned against people who are being exploited even more, which is the same thing they did to you, to your grandparents or great-grandparents when they came from the South. And now the other side of it is all these people, these black people are lazy. Nobody in the history of this country has ever worked harder than black people, okay? Let's just, not only in slavery, but, 2-3 jobs coming up from the South, being exploited for generations, producing massive wealth, and then getting pushed out because it's more profitable for the capitalists to go somewhere else, or to bring in people who are even more desperate and exploit them and turn the oppressed against each other. And we got to struggle people to see that this is the nature of the system. This is what it does to people. This is what it's going to keep on doing to people until we get rid of it. And it doesn't, it doesn't have a decent future for you. I mean, which doesn't mean we shouldn't struggle now. We should. People are poor, people are desperate, they can't raise their kids. They can't, they're working 2-3 jobs trying to, take care of their family, and finding it more and more difficult. Of course we should unite with people to struggle against that. And to find ways that people can, not just survive, but, not see their kids either go without health care or go without food or whatever. But we're not going to get where we need to go if we get people who are basically fundamentally being messed over by the same system to be fighting each other, whether it's in the youth in the gangs or whether it's people who are fighting for the same jobs. We got to get people to see the larger picture and the deeper causes of this, and then struggle to unite them to fight against the system. I mean, you know, look, something like McDonald's workers, you know, fighting for $15 an hour is not the answer, but it's something that should be supported, you know, because people do have to survive. And we can't just tell people, well, when the revolution comes, we'll solve all this. We have to pay attention to how people are suffering now and to waging struggle, but you have to do it in a way that's consistent with ultimately dealing with the whole problem, and not in a way that turns the oppressed against each other. So going back to Trump, though, and all that, all these things are what they're doing. They're doing it right now. It's not just what they will do. They're doing it now. And if you want to know where they will go, listen to them talk, because they're pretty much telling you what they're doing. Listen to Pence, not just Trump. You know, and see what they're actually doing. Look through the fog. You know, penetrate beyond the fog that's being created on the news media to act like these people don't know what they're doing and aren't getting anywhere. They are moving on all these different fronts that I just talked about in a very concentrated way. And, you know, it's getting, the hour is getting later and later to be able to stop this. You know, and I, you know, I've said elsewhere, people need to tell these people who don't, you know, really hate what Trump's about, but they go, oh, well, you know, we'll just wait for the Democratic blue wave, or, you know, or I can't see how taking to the streets would possibly accomplish anything, you know. When right around you in the world you've had examples of people who forced out governments by taking to the streets, you know, in a number of different countries. And I don't know, I can't imagine how we could get hundreds of thousands of people in the street. How many times in the last year and a half have you seen hundreds of thousands of people in the streets? It's that you don't want to take that step of putting it on the line to say that this whole regime has to go. And people need to be told that if, you know, that's morally bankrupt. And second of all, history is not going to look on you very kindly. If when you still had the chance, at least a fighting chance to stop this, you sat on your hands and did nothing. You know, like I even heard one of these intelligence chiefs, I forget what it was, whether it was Hayden or Clapper, one of these people used to head up the National Intelligence or the NSA or whatever, saying, you know, making an analogy to Nazi Germany. And he was asked about it, and he said, well, I wouldn't compare the U.S. today under Trump to Germany in 1942, but I would compare it to Germany in 1933. Now, even a person in the ruling class is saying that. Listen up, all you liberals. You know, here's a person from the ruling class. And what was 1933? That was when Hitler was in power, started moving against all these other forces, but hadn't fully consolidated everything yet. And if people had moved against it then, they might have been able to prevent all the horrors that came afterward, including the killing of the 6 million Jews in the concentration camps and everything else. Well, right now, you are in a position that's similar to Germany in 1933. And if you don't move to do something about it, then whatever comes from that, which is not going to be good, it's going to be disastrous at least, and catastrophic possibly, that's on you too. Because, and people, I'm saying, I'm not just ranting here, I'm saying people need to be brought up against this. You know, that's on you too if you don't act now when you could have a chance to actually prevent all these horrors that you know somewhere are coming. You know, and get rid of your illusions that somehow the Democratic Party is going to do this or Mueller's going to do it. None of that's going to do anything in the absence of millions of people in the streets demanding that this whole thing has to go.